This was stated by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. And Donald Trump also says, "I will end the war with one call." Meanwhile, dictators are regrouping for a final push. We will not only talk about this right now. My name is Iryna Uzlova, and today is Friday, July 19th. I'm joined by political scientist Borys Tizengauzen and Oleksandr Musienko, head of the Center for Military and Legal Studies. Friends, welcome to our program. I'm glad to see you. Glory to Ukraine and death to the enemies. Soon they will be in hot hell, and the hot phase of the war may end by the end of this year, as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said in an interview with the BBC. Let me remind you that the president has been in the UK since yesterday. A visit to Ireland is planned. Zelenskyy spoke to the BBC and said that such a scenario is possible if our partners do not stop helping us. The weaker Russia is on the battlefield, the stronger its position is at the negotiating table, and we can also find ourselves at this table, because Zelenskyy sees diplomacy as one of the options for ending this war. The world must pressure Russia to make this possible. Agree to a diplomatic settlement. But how far is this track from being realized? What should be done, and who should put pressure on the Russian terrorist federation? Boris, please. Our allies are helping us. At the very least, we are talking about lifting restrictions on strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation. This is one of the goals. Zelenskyy spoke about this goal, speaking at the UK has always been ahead of everyone, especially such cautious allies. So, as in the West, someone has to start first. Remember, any coalition, any Ramstein.
Поэтому у них же как на Западе. Кто-то первый должен начать. Помните, любая коалиция, любые Рамштайны, давайте вы начнете поставлять.
You start supplying missiles, and we will join in. You start talking about fighter jets, and we will. In this case, someone has to make a decision. The bad news was that the British defense minister, at first there was news that we were allowed to attack the entire territory of Russia, and then he said that he was misunderstood. We do not allow it. Scholz said no. What is Scholz going to allow us to do? Taurus, which he does not supply? The U.S. position is also clear, and Biden is not in the mood for this right now. He clearly said, we are not changing the rules for now. This is what needs to happen. Is Zelenskyy saying that strengthening our positions on the battlefield means worsening Russia's negotiating position?
Мы не меняем правила пока что. В общем, вот что должно произойти. То есть Зеленский про что говорит? Он говорит, усиление на позиции на поле боя, соответственно, ухудшение для России переговорной позиции. Как мы можем усилить позицию?
How can we strengthen our position on the battlefield? We need to get the F-16s that are still waiting to arrive, to carry out the necessary number of strikes, but so far nothing has happened, so we are in a waiting mode. Hopefully, the story of lifting the ban will move forward in the UK. Oleksandr, when the president says the hot phase of the war might end by year's end. What is meant by this end? Will it be a lull or a potential truce on the battlefield? And then will we move on to finding a diplomatic solution? The Russian Terrorist Federation can only use this time to build up its military power and continue to operate its military-industrial complex 24/7. What risks can be inherent in this process? We will work on this, I hope. We will also focus on arming ourselves and improving our defense capabilities. In any case, this is a task for us that must be realized, regardless of how the war ends, and I believe that it will end with our victory.
Сценарію, як би війна не закінчилася, я вірю, що переможна для нас. Це в будь-якому випадку для нас завдання, яке має бути реалізоване.
As for what the president is saying, I think it is logical and understandable that he is trying to mobilize support for the event, which seems more difficult now, not because of the wrong things being done, but because our partners are not reacting in the right way. The United States, of course, we are not taking them on, and we are not talking about them. They have focused solely on the election campaign, which is an internal matter. European partners are not ready to make fateful decisions, and since the United States has not yet made any major decisions that would radically change the situation on the battlefield, this unfortunately complicates the situation. Therefore, today, we need to mobilize support from our partners. The President is actively working on this. With his trips and efforts, he is trying to encourage our partners to help us, urging them to support us. Before the interview, Zelenskyy told Stoltenberg on the BBC that the war might last 10 years. He says that the paradox is that the sooner we mobilize and show our readiness for a long war, the sooner this war will end. He's right to some extent because the West has to demonstrate its resolve and readiness, as seen from the battlefield. We have proven our capability on the battlefield time and again. But at certain moments, we are being restricted. Supplies are delayed, and support is delayed. In particular, the 14 unarmed brigades that the President spoke about. As a good friend of mine said, he is trying to find out where the F-16s have gone. He even jokes that he bought a space surveillance device and is trying to find out from which galaxy these F-16s are coming, because they should have arrived by now. He also found out that the U.S. has 72 F-16 combat aircraft in reserve, ready for use.
Яка кількість світлових років потрібна, щоб вони зрештою долетіли? До речі, ви знаєте, що 72 машини бойових, от я дізнався, навів довідки, 72 бойових машини F-16
72 vehicles that are not currently needed are in reserve. This means that they are not in service and are not an urgent need for the U.S. Army, as it is not currently engaged in global wars. American military science believes that F-35s will be enough for a potential global confrontation with China. Thus, it is not known how much longer the F-16s can remain in the reserve, but they continue to be part of this reserve. So this leads to two possible scenarios. The first, favorable to us, which the President is talking about, assumes that we continue to put pressure and conduct operations, ensuring a strong position at the negotiating table with Russia. The other scenario assumes that the West may be inclined to save Russia from defeat, which in turn may lead to a slowdown in support for Ukraine. As a result, according to some Western politicians, this may lead to negotiations, but it is not clear whether we will be in as strong a position as we would like. So now there is a struggle to strengthen our position. The telescope, for example, was obviously bought to look into the distant future. I also considered buying one because neither I nor President Volodymyr Zelenskyy nor our soldiers or pilots can see the F-16 without a telescope. We were very cautious and look with fear at the month of November and what precedes it, that is, at the days of today. In a BBC interview, Zelenskyy remarked that, despite Trump being challenging, Ukraine will remain resolute and hardworking. Let's hear more from Zelenskyy and discuss the potential impact of the U.S. situation on Ukraine. He might not fully understand the situation, so engaging with the U.S. is crucial. We are ready to work with anyone who will be in power in the United States. Trump is not an easy job, but we are also hard workers. Donald Trump, amid applause, spoke at the convention in Milwaukee yesterday. The final day of the Republican convention was a global spectacle, clearly visible without any need for a telescope. Without this Make America Great Again slogan and the symbolism that Trump uses, international analysts say that the situation could become Make America Bad Again. Trump claims he can end a war in one step and promises to end every international crisis.
лише зробити один крок, і війна завершиться. Давайте почуємо, який, і коментуємо.
In particular, the war with Russia and Ukraine, which, in his opinion, would not have happened if he had been president. The Third World War could be catastrophic due to the availability of modern destructive weapons. This calls for change. During the presidencies of other U.S. leaders, Russia invaded Georgia, annexed Crimea, and is now trying to take over all of Ukraine. However, according to Trump, under his presidency, Russia would not take anything. I will stop these wars with just a phone call. I can stop any war with a phone call. Oh, so determined. CNN reports that Zelenskyy and Trump are planning a phone call for this Friday for the first time since the full-scale invasion began. This has been confirmed by two sources, but it is not yet known when exactly it will take place or when it will be televised. I don't even know what to think. Trump claims he could have prevented all of this, and while he probably has a script, his quick change of heart could change everything. This isn't a phone call that will end the war. Please explain the current situation with Putin and whether we should be hopeful or concerned. Boris, you have the floor. Yes, of course, given the fact that Donald Trump is likely to become president of the United States again, I would recommend that he speak more cautiously and diplomatically. It is not Trump who is doing the hard work, but we are ready for it, and he may not even know what is going on in Ukraine. I would probably put it a little differently. The fact that there will be a phone call is very good news. And the fact that Trump says, if I were president, the war would not have started, of course, he is disingenuous. The war does not start because Biden becomes president. The war starts because Putin decides to start it, and he was counting on a completely different war. In terms of duration, resources, isolation, sanctions, the same applies to Israel and Hamas. The situation in the Middle East is crucial. Trump's populist claims like, I'll pick up the phone and fix it, put him in a tough spot. If he becomes president, the Democrats will constantly remind him of these promises. Pick up the phone. You said you would end the wars. If Trump says that he is ready to call and demand that Ukraine give up the territories, this will cause serious resistance. In other words, he could put himself in a trap. Now, strangely enough, attention is focused on domestic American issues, as Biden may decide to withdraw from the election in the near future. Opinion polls have already been commissioned to evaluate potential candidates such as Kamala Harris. We certainly wish Biden well, and Trump as well.
Поэтому вот так. 19-го, да, они будут разговаривать, президент Зеленский и кандидат в президенты Дональд Трамп. А там, кстати, несется вовсю. То есть здесь почему фокус сместился, как говорится, око Сауронова, вот передвинулось, как в фильме знаменитом, прямо внутрь Соединенных Штатов? Да потому что Байден вот-вот сейчас фактически в воскресенье может сняться с выборов уже. Заказаны социсследования по восприятию Камалы Харрис и других кандидатов. Я очень удачно, я еще раз подчеркну, Байдену здоровья, Трампу здоровья, но так удачно сложилось.
But the coronavirus story makes the situation particularly interesting. If Biden decides to resign, it could be perceived not as a personal failure, but as a result of complications from the coronavirus that have weakened his health. Thus, the coronavirus may be creating certain circumstances for a resignation, should it occur. I have a feeling that Biden will be filming on Sunday. Axios reported that Biden might withdraw from the election this weekend, with ABC News noting he's increasingly receptive to calls to step down. He requested a poll on Kamala Harris's chances. He is concerned about this, as reported by the New York Times. Borys, has he become more receptive, or does he not want to let the Democrats lose? Some sponsors don't give money. Elections are always about money. The more money you have, the better your campaign is, and so on. Some sponsors are not providing financial support, including so-called dinosaurs of the Democratic Party, such as Chuck Schumer, and even Barack Obama, have expressed their opinion that Biden's position should be reconsidered. Previously, iconic and popular personalities such as George Clooney and several other celebrities have already said that they respect Biden but would prefer him to withdraw from the election. Again, this shows that a responsible politician will not cling to the office at any cost and will not turn himself into the ultimate live-action figure, although Biden looks very good for his age. You should not jeopardize and split your own party because of personal ambitions. This is the true political wisdom. Do not destroy your political power for the sake of personal aspirations. Which historically has a much longer life, and it will continue to do so. J.D. Vance claimed Ukraine can't win due to insufficient U.S. weapon production. Pentagon spokeswoman Sabrina Singh responded, urging Vance to reconsider his critical view. Pentagon's opinion on whether Ukraine can win the war. And Mr. Oleksandr, please comment, please do. It's important to remember that under this administration, we have revitalized our defense industrial base. We are creating jobs here at home by producing 155mm shells and other equipment. This not only strengthens our defense industrial base, but also helps Ukrainians. I also reject the notion that Ukraine cannot win this war. We've seen Ukrainians make significant progress, pushing back Russian forces over time. This effort, supported globally, reflects the commitment of the United States. Oleksandr, who is right, J.D. Vance, or Sabrina Singh. Europe may support Ukraine, especially with Ursula von der Leyen serving another 5 years. Said that she would turn the European Union into a defense union. Very well, but we need an offensive alliance. We are in a situation where defense is important, but to change the situation on the battlefield, we also need offensive actions in the future. It's important to remember that being on the defense at some point, we will need to think about a possible transition to the offensive. To ensure a successful transition to the offensive, we need more support. As for the defense, I am confident that we will be able to stop the Russian offensive, and the defense forces are already demonstrating this on the battlefield. However, the further fate of the situation is still unknown. The question is whether our partners are ready to support Ukraine and supply weapons for a long time. If the partners are willing to do this, how will it be realized if, for example, Germany plans to cut its budget for next year from $8 to $4 billion? This looks like the opposite of the level of support needed. It is clear that some of the weapons have already been contracted, and Rheinmetall will fulfill these contracts. But statements must be backed up by real deeds and actions. So when we say that there is a defense alliance that will develop and invest in its security, it is great. But sometimes, in order to ensure better positions in defense, this defense must be active. And active defense implies offense. Offense is determination. Offense is support. And in Ukraine, The Ukrainian armed forces do not lack this determination. But as for our Western partners, some of them you can see. We mentioned Storm Shadow. Starmer no longer mentioned strikes on Russian territory. He was criticized there by both the far left and the far right. I don't know why he got so scared after the NATO summit that the British are still justifying why they can't strike at Russian territory. I suspect what factors influenced him. The United States has expressed dissatisfaction with this idea, and they are not ready to implement it yet. But Scholz also mentioned that it is not allowed to strike at Russia. It is not allowed to shoot down missiles over the territory of Ukraine, which would also be considered an escalation. To ensure this, there must be real action, and then everything will be fine. Oleksandr, what about the missiles and their long-range capabilities from our Western partners? Don't you think they are now less likely to be fired at the temporarily occupied territories? I mean Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. Or is it just the impression that we might have run out of missiles and used up all our stockpiles? Of course, we do not have bottomless reserves, but if we sometimes do not see such a frequency of strikes, this may indicate that the next strikes are just being prepared and need careful preparation. We always take a pause for this. In addition, each strike is carefully calibrated and executed with high precision to demonstrate effectiveness. From time to time, such pauses are taken, but this does not change the fact that we need more missiles. It's no secret, but even the supplies that are being transferred to us are being used by the Ukrainian forces as efficiently as possible. Kim Jong-un supported Russia's just war against Ukraine and promised to unite with Moscow to protect peace. This is Kim Jong-un, the North Korean dictator supplying munitions to the Russian Federation. He meets with Putin, and he flies there because he is certainly not welcome anywhere else. Borys, does this mean that dictators are already rallying, feeling the taste of blood, preparing for some kind of a last leap? In case we do see some kind of breakdown and failure of democracy in the United States of America, or does this simply mean that the unchanging activities and regime of Kim Jong-un in helping the Russian Federation are steadily on course? Russia and North Korea are deepening cooperation, with Kim Jong-un supplying missiles and possibly receiving weapon technology in return. However, China is likely uneasy about this strengthened alliance. China has an understandable vassal in North Korea, and China does not need Russia teaming up with anyone and starting wars. Against the backdrop of joint exercises of Belarusian and Chinese special forces, Russian shaheeds suddenly began to fly. They didn't fly before, when they were launched by the hundreds, but now they are. Plus, Lukashenko is dramatically diffusing the situation with Ukraine on the border. This is a whole chain of interconnected processes. Lukashenko, for example, made a curtsy toward China so that, God forbid, transit would not be blocked. Putin didn't like that, so the shaheeds flew away. I call it a Valentine from Putin. So it's not all that smooth. And that's why the civilized world, the democratic world, must understand that if tomorrow Kim Jong-un suddenly just wants to shoot towards the Yellow Sea, escalate the situation even further, and Putin will suddenly come to his aid. And he will definitely come. Whether our partners will come to each other's aid remains an open question. Unfortunately, dictators pay much less attention to the rules when it comes to unification against the backdrop of their own survival, or rather, they neglect any rules at all. Instead, the Western world, the democratic world, is still thinking,
не обращают внимания на правила, точнее, они вообще плюют на любые правила. А вот западный мир демократический все еще думает,
whether missiles flying towards Ukraine can be shot down or not, even if they are flying in their direction, as for example, in the direction of Poland. Is it possible to shoot down these missiles or not, and does it not escalate the conflict? Oleksandr, as fears of escalation wane and the unity of dictators grows, Western partners' resolve will likely increase. We just need to be patient. We will see. It's hard to say now because China has again shown its teeth by announcing the termination of the agreement. On a treaty on the non-proliferation of short and intermediate-range missiles and nuclear weapons. This dialogue was started with the United States, then there was a significant pause, after which the dialogue was resumed. China is demonstrating this once again, and I don't see a significant change in policy in the United States today. I didn't see it after the Republican Party convention either. Except for the fact that the Republicans may be tougher on China and Iran, which is a fact in general in terms of breaking up the club of dictators, I fear that the recipe that may be considered by various doctrines, including the Republican Party and their ideological inspirers, may involve a scenario that we all do not like at all. The only tool
ідеологічними натхненниками, він може передбачати сценарії, які нам усім зовсім не сподобаються. Тому що єдиний інструмент, який вони...
Some Democrats suggest trying to pull Putin away from Xi Jinping's influence.
Висмикнути Путіна із лап Сі Цзіньпіня.
You know, with all the ensuing consequences of trying to reconcile with Russia and use it to contain China. There are no other concepts yet. Europe, by the way, is still considering the scenario of negotiating with China, and they have a more interesting concept. European countries, including Macron, has a more interesting concept for resolving this situation. Despite the criticism, he is trying to show Xi Jinping that his support for Russia is wrong. The Europeans are trying to resolve this issue through China. The Americans, unfortunately, cannot do it through China, so they are looking for other ways to break the alliance of enemies, trying to pull someone to their side. There are two ways. Defeat enemies or turn allies from their circle to weaken them. Currently, Americans and Europeans favor the latter. Oleksandr, Borys, thank you very much, friends, for finding the time. And every day for us, for our viewers, and on YouTube, Channel 24, you find time for a segment with me. Thank you. Take care of yourself. See you soon. Goodbye. Oleksandr Musienko, head of the Center for Military Legal Studies, and Borys Tizengauzen, a political strategist, were with me. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to Borys's YouTube channel, Tizengauzen, linked below. On YouTube, subscribe to the Musienko channel for more analytics and information. Also follow YouTube 24 to support and expand our discussions. Remember, as Antoine de Saint-Exupéry said, only the heart sees well. The eyes cannot see the main thing. Take care. Believe in the armed forces.
І підняти настрій, нагадати, що в житті головне, як писав Антуан де Сент-Екзюпері, добре бачить саме лиш серце, головного очима не побачиш. От до цього й прислухайтеся. Бережіть себе, вірте в Збройні Сили.
Forces of Ukraine. See you and we will win.